The Imperium calls itself the light of mankind, a beacon, a savior, a flame to keep the galaxy from falling into eternal night. It promises order where chaos once reigned, safety where death stalks the shadows. Yet its light does not touch all. Some worlds lie forever in darkness, overshadowed by walls, chains, and the weight of unbroken fear. Among billions of stars, countless planets shine. Glory, trade, triumph, all bask in the warmth of imperial guidance. Yet some planets are remembered not for achievement, but for silence, for prisons carved into barren landscapes, for penal worlds where the condemned toil until their bones splinter and their voices vanish. The Emperor's name is spoken not in prayer, but in terror. These are the camps, penal worlds, re-education centers, black ships, and hidden facilities. Few speak of them aloud. Fewer survive to recall what life once felt like. Those who do remember only the scent of smoke, steel, and despair. The contradiction is stark. The Imperium proclaims salvation. Behind the gates lie chains, faith demanded at the edge of a blade, redemption promised only through suffering. Picture it, endless deserts beneath dying suns, black fortresses scarred by centuries of storms, towers of steel pierce the sky, servitors scan the horizon with soulless eyes. A horn sounds, doors grind open, prisoners shuffle forward, chained together, their faces hollow, their voices gone. They are told this place will save their souls. They know it will break their bodies. Each day is measured in fear. The alarm sounds before dawn. Prisoners rise to chant prayers. Hours are spent in back-breaking labor. Mines, factories, weapon forges. The sun is a pale witness, rarely seen, rarely felt. At night, lectures on loyalty and creed hammer into minds already worn thin, and those who falter vanish. Executions are public, blood is instruction. The sky burns orange at dusk. Ash drifts through the air. Servitors march along the walls, their mechanical limbs clicking. Prisoners' shadows stretch long across the cracked earth. The wind carries the scent of sweat, smoke, and despair. Every sound echoes, chains rattle, whispers of fear, sobs swallowed by stone. This is the paradox at the heart of the Imperium. Salvation or imprisonment, faith or shackles, every soul learns the answer. Slowly, painfully, some bend, some burn, none emerge the same. The voice of the Imperium proclaims safety, purity, loyalty, but the walls whisper another truth. Screams in the dark, families erased, billions concealed, never named again. Imagine the silence between stars. Among the shining lights of Terra, the Astronomicon burns like a lighthouse for the galaxy. But in the shadow of penal worlds, the cries of humanity are muffled. They never reach the Emperor's ears. The beacon above means nothing below. Yet hope lingers, not for those within the walls, but for the mind to remember what freedom once meant. Each prisoner carries a memory, a spark too small to light a world, but enough to haunt the machinery of the Imperium. Some guards whisper of the past. Old songs, faces that smiled, children who never grew up. These memories are dangerous. They are extinguished quickly. One hint of nostalgia, and punishment comes swiftly. At night, the prisoners huddle where the walls cannot see. They speak in hushed tones, plans, dreams, stories, tiny sparks of rebellion in the darkness. Even a glance at the stars above fills them with longing. Stars they may never reach, and so the question remains. The Imperium claims to save humanity. It promises light, yet builds shadows as vast as stars. If salvation requires 1 billion cages, 1 trillion chains, was it ever salvation at all? Or merely power clothed in gold and worship? Every camp, every tower, every cell is a testament, not to mercy, not to the Emperor's grace, but to the Empire's will, to the cost of obedience, to the weight of faith demanded at gunpoint. Some say the Emperor's light guides all men, others whisper. It guides only those who serve, while the rest are left to rot. And in the darkness of those worlds, the answer becomes clear. The light of the Imperium shines, but only on those who are chained to see it. Screams echo, dust rises, shadows move where the sun never reaches. The galaxy groans, and somewhere beyond sight, beyond hope, humanity waits. Not for salvation, but for understanding. Chains rattle, walls breathe, silence stretches across barren plains, and still, the Imperium calls itself the light of mankind. But the light never reaches everyone. To understand how such chains were forged, how the promise of salvation became a prison of obedience, we must look back. Back to the age of strife, when mankind tore itself apart and first learned that control was easier to build than freedom. Long before the Emperor unified the stars, there was the age of strife, a time when mankind turned upon itself. Civilizations collapsed, worlds fell silent, communications shattered, warp storms swallowed entire sectors, faith and reason alike broke under the pressure. Billions starved, billions died. Those who survived learned fear, learned obedience, learned that survival often meant cruelty. It was in this chaos that the seeds of penal worlds were sown. Humanity needed control, discipline, tools to guide the lost and punish the defiant. Early experiments were harsh, necessary, they said. Entire populations were relocated. Heretical priests, mutinous guards, criminals, and those who questioned authority, they were sent to isolated worlds. Worlds stripped bare, stripped cold, stripped of mercy. When the Emperor began the Great Crusade, his vision was clear. The galaxy would be unified, worlds would kneel under the Imperium, order would reign, obedience would be absolute. Those who resisted would face the walls of the penal world. Planets once proud became prisons. Entire populations were conscripted into labor, indoctrination, and re-education. The Imperium claimed mercy in the guise of discipline. The truth was simpler and darker. Dissent could not be tolerated. Faith had to be enforced. Humanity had to be molded into soldiers and servants of the Emperor. From the ashes of rebellion rose black ships, vessels that hunted the heretic and the lost. Those captured were delivered to penal worlds, families torn apart, children separated, faith demanded, then enforced. Survival was earned in sweat, blood, and fear. Even the young were not spared. Orphans deemed untamed were consigned to Schola Progenium. There they were trained to serve, molded into loyal instruments. The Imperium justified it as preparation, education, and protection. The children learned obedience at the cost of innocence. Every penal world was designed the same. Mountains stripped to rock, rivers diverted, mines dug to exhaustion, factories that never slept. Guards watched with cold precision. Servitors patrolled tirelessly. Every action, every thought, every spark of defiance, noted, recorded, corrected. The nights were worst. Winds howled through empty streets, chains clinked against stone, shadows stretched unnaturally under watchtowers, prisoners huddled in corners, whispering quietly to one another. Every sound was amplified, the scrape of a boot, the hiss of steam, the distant scream, and fear became a constant companion. Yet even in this grim discipline, some memories lingered. Old songs hummed quietly, legends of heroes whispered between laborers. Brief glances at distant stars reminded prisoners that freedom was once more than a word. The Imperium allowed no hope to flourish openly, but tiny sparks survived. Enough to haunt minds and hearts, enough to leave cracks in the perfect system of control. Through these early penal worlds, the Emperor's vision of a unified galaxy began to take form. Order was enforced, rebellion punished, humanity reshaped. But the cost was vast. The screams of billions, almost the toil of countless lives, the shadow of punishment stretched across entire systems. The galaxy remembered this in silence. History recorded victories. It rarely recorded the cost. The Imperium's light shone bright in the sky, but below, behind walls of adamantium and towers of steel, the true work of control persisted. Even now, the wind carries echoes of the first penal worlds. Dust swirls through empty factories. The clang of machinery haunts silent corridors. Prisoners long gone left only shadows behind. And still, the Imperium marches, spreading unity and salvation while the worlds of discipline watch sweetly waiting for those who falter. The galaxy had barely begun to recover when betrayal struck from within. Horus, the favored son of the Emperor, turned against his command. The Horus heresy shook the Imperium to its core. Worlds that once bowed now resisted, loyalties fractured, fear spread faster than fire across dry plains. The Emperor's vision of unity teetered, chaos whispered in the dark, promising freedom from the chains of the Imperium. The need for control became urgent. No defiance could be tolerated. Every rebellion, every heretic, every disloyal citizen was sent to the ever-growing network of penal worlds. Black ships carried the condemned across the stars. Prisoners arrived in chains, their eyes wide with terror. Families were separated, names erased. Faith demanded, obedience enforced. These worlds expanded rapidly. The Imperium had learned the bitter lesson of Horus's betrayal. Leniency was weakness. Discipline must be absolute. Schola Progenium schools multiplied. Orphans and abandoned children were taken and trained in the art of obedience. They became instruments of the Emperor's will, loyal beyond question. Those who failed, who doubted, who even hesitated were removed. Lives were cheap. Souls were a resource to be molded. Every penal world was a fortress of control, and walls of adamantium rose high. Watchtowers pierced the skies. Servitors patrolled without pause. Guards enforced the creed with unflinching rigor. Labor was relentless. Punishment was constant. Hope existed only as a memory quickly extinguished. The designs of these worlds were brutal. Mines gouged into living rock. Factories belched smoke day and night. Every step was monitored. Every glance recorded. Any whisper of defiance became a lesson in pain. Execution was not rare. It was instruction. The Imperium taught through fear. Even psychers were not safe. Those who manifested forbidden powers were hunted. Some were used as fuel for the Astronomicon, their existence feeding the light that guided the Emperor's fleets. Others were sent to special containment worlds, their lives measured in suffering. Yet even in such darkness, small sparks of humanity survived. Prisoners whispered songs from home. Legends passed silently among laborers. A shared glance, a remembered story. These became acts of rebellion in themselves. The Imperium allowed no hope to flourish openly, but the human spirit persisted quietly like embers under ash. Through the heresy, the network of penal worlds spread across the galaxy, each one a monument to obedience, each one a warning. The Imperium's light above was brilliant, but below, chains, sweat, blood, and silence prevailed. Survival required submission. Faith required terror. Loyalty demanded fear. The galaxy watched in hushed awe. Systems obeyed, planets conformed, and somewhere in the shadows the imprisoned remembered. The lives lost, the screams unheard, the children molded into soldiers. These were the hidden costs of unity. The Horus heresy reshaped not just the Imperium's enemies, but its methods. Penal worlds became more than punishment. They became tools, instruments of control, training grounds for soldiers, orphans, psychers. The Imperium did not merely enforce obedience, it manufactured it. Even now, across countless stars, the legacy of those times persists. Walls remain, towers watch, servitors patrol, the black ships sail on. Schola Progenium trains another generation. The Imperium's shadow grows with every passing century. And the lessons of Horus's betrayal are etched into every cell, every prisoner, every soul. The heresy taught one lesson above all. Leniency is death. Absolute control is survival. And so the network of penal worlds endures, silent, relentless, a galaxy-wide testament to fear, obedience, and the price of defiance. The heresy had reshaped the Imperium. Penal worlds spread like silent shadows across the stars. What began as punishment became a system, a network of obedience, discipline, and fear. And on these worlds, the true face of imperial control revealed itself. The penal world stretched endlessly. Mountains of jagged rock clawed at gray skies. Rivers were choked with ash. Dust blew through streets empty of life. These planets were not home. They were cages. They were instruments of the Imperium's will. Towers of adamantium pierced the clouds. Watchtowers loomed like silent judges. Servitors patrolled ceaselessly. Their mechanical eyes scanned every shadow. Every prisoner movement was recorded. Every whisper noted. Silence ruled. Fear thrived. Barbed wire stretched in impossible loops, cutting the horizon. Gates grated open with grinding metal. Doors sealed behind prisoners, locking hope away. Factories belched smoke that never cleared. Mines carved into the living rock like scars. The air was heavy. The sky was dim. Light rarely touched the ground. The soundscape was relentless. Chains clinked against stone. Bolters thundered in training yards. The hiss of steam echoed in empty corridors. Every footstep, every clank, every scream amplified the weight of punishment. Even the architecture enforced obedience. Dormitories were narrow. Cells were cold. Walls reflected light and shadow in ways that disoriented the mind. Every corridor was a lesson. Every corner a reminder. The Emperor watches at night. The moons cast thin slivers of light. Shadows moved unnaturally. Guards watched without pause. Servitors whirred along patrol paths. Prisoners huddled together, whispered words of home, of freedom, barely audible. Every sound a risk, every glance a possible sentence. The penal worlds were designed for efficiency and control. Labor was endless. The landscape itself became part of the sentence. Mines descended into darkness, factories stretched for kilometers. Bridges spanned chasms of rock. Each structure reinforced the next. Nothing was accidental, nothing was kind. Even in open spaces, fear was tangible. Courtyards were empty, save for the clang of hammers or the shuffle of forced marches. Executions happened in view of all. Blood served as both warning and instruction. The architecture itself was a teacher of obedience, cruelty, and survival. The skies above were rarely clear, smoke and dust mixed with clouds. Flares of fire from distant foundries cast eerie light across jagged terrain. Each morning, alarms shattered the quiet. Each evening, lectures and prayers hammered minds worn by labor. The built environment was part of the punishment, part of the indoctrination. And still, some sparks of life persisted. Prisoners whispered songs, shared stories, bones, remembered distant stars. But the design of these worlds crushed more than it allowed to flourish. The buildings, the towers, the wire, the walls, they were instruments of an empire that demanded complete submission. Across every penal world, the lesson was clear. The Imperium's might was absolute. Resistance was futile. Humanity, reduced to labor and faith, moved under the shadow of steel. The architecture spoke silently, yet with terrifying clarity: obedience or death. These worlds were more than prisons. They were warnings. They were templates. They showed what happened to those who defied the Emperor. The landscape itself taught compliance. Every rock, every wall, every tower reminded prisoners of their place. And so the galaxy learned. The light of the Imperium shone far above, but below, among jagged mountains and endless factories, humanity endured, broken, silent, and watched. The walls of the penal worlds did more than keep prisoners in. They defined every moment of life. Discipline was absolute. Obedience was enforced at every level. The Imperium's reach was total. Selection was merciless. Those accused of heresy, rebellion, or even minor disobedience were sent here. Unpaid taxes, questioned loyalty, doubt of the Emperor. All could condemn a citizen. Guards and commissars chose swiftly. Confessors and inquisitors oversaw the process. Their word was law. Death was always nearby. Once inside, indoctrination began. Creed, prayers, loyalty hammered into minds already worn by fear. Labor was relentless. Mines, factories, and forges demanded every ounce of strength. Even the smallest mistake brought punishment. Every day was calculated to break the will, then rebuild it in service to the Imperium. Night offered no relief. Cells were cold. Darkness pressed against skin and mind. Prisoners slept fitfully, if at all. Servitors glided silently through halls, watching. Every whisper was noted, every act of defiance punished. Fear was constant, and it was effective. Executions were public, vivid lessons in obedience. Bolters thundered, chains rattled, blood soaked the ground. Those who survived learned quickly. Compliance kept the body alive. Faith preserved the soul, question either. And death followed. Even young ones were not spared. Orphans in Schola Progenium learned early the price of hesitation. Mistakes were corrected with pain, doubt corrected with indoctrination. Their lives shaped to become loyal instruments of the Imperium. Psychers were hunted, their power feared. Some were executed outright, others were used to fuel the Astronomicon. Every action had purpose, every life had a role. The Imperium did not waste potential, it shaped it forcibly. Guards enforced rules with precision. Commissars walked the corridors inspecting, judging. Confessors pressed for confession. Inquisitors monitored the greater picture. Their presence was invisible but felt. Compliance was not optional. Survival depended on it. Hymns and chants filled the air, not for comfort, not for worship alone, for control. Repetition of prayers numbed minds. The cadence became a rhythm of obedience. Dissonance was punished. Silence was dangerous. The Emperor's name was both savior and executioner. Within the factories and mines, prisoners moved like cogs in a machine. Labor was endless. Every action recorded, every failure corrected. The landscape, the architecture, the people, all designed to produce loyalty. Broken bodies, submissive minds, perfect soldiers, perfect servants. Even whispers of rebellion were fleeting. Rumors spread, plans whispered in shadowed corners, but the network of eyes, the patrols, the surveillance, caught most. Sparks of hope were snuffed quickly. Only memory and fear survived. The penal worlds were a system. They enforced obedience. They molded humanity. They taught compliance through fear, pain, and indoctrination. They ensured the Imperium's control stretched across every star. Resistance was crushed, questioning punished, submission demanded, and so under the endless towers, the ceaseless patrols, and the unblinking eyes of servitors, life continued. The Imperium's machinery of discipline spun flawlessly. Every prisoner knew their place, every guard knew their duty, every soul was measured, every action recorded. The galaxy above may have seen the light of the Imperium, but below, among the walls, wire, and towers, the true work of the Emperor was done. Fear, labor, obedience, and the silent lesson that defiance had no home in his unified empire. The towers, the walls, the endless patrols of the penal worlds did more than enforce obedience. They set the rhythm of life. Every sunrise, every alarm, every command dictated the day. The heresy had taught the Imperium that control must be absolute, and so life inside continued, unbroken, relentless. At 04 unquote, the horns sounded. The prisoners stirred, cold and stiff. Eyes opened to darkness and shadowed cells. The creed was recited immediately. Voices were rough, mechanical, echoing down narrow corridors, each syllable a reminder. Obedience is survival. Faith is demanded. Fear is constant. Every note carried the weight of consequence. By 0500, the labor began. Minds yawned like open wounds in the planet's surface. Prisoners marched through factories, through smoke, through endless conveyor belts. Bolters thundered in training yards, mixing with the hiss of steam and the clank of chains. Every step measured, every action observed. Mistakes brought punishment, swift and public. The work was grueling. Heat from smelting furnaces burned hands. Rock dust choked lungs. Machines groaned and hissed. Servitors patrolled tirelessly, their mechanical eyes scanning for weakness. Guards watched without pause. Obedience was demanded in muscle and mind. Resistance could not survive. Even in the early hours, fear was omnipresent. Whispers of dissent were silenced before they could form. Any hesitation was corrected with pain. The penal world itself seemed alive, walls pressing, floors trembling, towers watching. The landscape shaped the prisoners as much as the guards and servitors. Prisoners moved in long columns, faces pale, bodies bruised, voices hoarse. Each knew that one misstep could end them. The commissars walked the lines, eyes like steel, chainsword at their side. They struck without warning. They judged without mercy. Every prisoner carried a personal tally of mistakes, remembered only by the imperial machine. Meals were brief and cold, nutrition was minimal, conversation was forbidden. Every moment outside labor was structured, every thought monitored. The prisoners moved like cogs in a vast, merciless machine. Those who faltered quickly learned. Survival depended on perfect compliance. Sounds filled the air, the echo of boots, the clang of hammers, the distant roar of machinery. Even the wind seemed to carry warnings. Smoke and ash hung in the sky. Shadows moved unnaturally. Moonlight barely pierced the dust. Night would come again, but for now the day demanded toil, obedience, and the unrelenting weight of fear. Even the smallest details were controlled. Sleep schedules, eating times, rest periods, all dictated by a system designed to suppress the individual. No idle moments existed. Prisoners learned quickly that thinking beyond the task at hand was dangerous. Each mind was molded for service, each body punished into obedience. And yet, some flickers of humanity persisted. Prisoners whispered quiet songs from home, shared stolen glances, and remembered distant stars. These sparks were dangerous. Hope was a lesson the Imperium did not allow, but they survived, hidden beneath the surface of terror. Every shared story became a quiet act of rebellion. Every glance a reminder that freedom had once existed. The morning dragged on, hours passing like centuries. Fatigue and fear combined to dull thought. The penal worlds were designed to break bodies and minds. Every worker, every prisoner became part of the Empire's machinery. Labor, indoctrination, surveillance. The cycle was unending. By midday, sweat, soot, and blood-coated uniforms in hands. Voices were hoarse from chanting the creed. Limbs ached, backs burned. Yet the work continued. Survival demanded obedience. Faith demanded submission. The Imperium's lessons were repeated endlessly each day, each hour, until the body and the mind were no longer separate. Even the air seemed to punish. Dust clung to skin, lungs struggled with every breath. The sun, pale and distant, offered no comfort. Heat burned relentlessly, cold seeped into bones, hunger and thirst were constants. Every element of the environment reinforced the punishment. Servitors moved like silent predators gliding along catwalks and through factories. Their mechanical limbs grasped, prodded, recorded, guards shouted, bolters fired warning shots. Punishment was immediate, fear was omnipresent, survival required vigilance. Constant vigilance. Despite the oppression, tiny sparks of defiance persisted. A whisper shared under cover of steam. A hand briefly clasping another in solidarity. These small acts were dangerous but necessary for the mind to survive. The prisoners' memories of distant stars, of home worlds, of families. These became the faint light in an otherwise unbroken darkness. By the end of the morning, prisoners were exhausted. Muscles burned, lungs gasped, skin blistered. Yet the routine pressed on. Every day was the same, every day was a lesson. Every day was survival, or death. The Imperium demanded loyalty, the penal worlds delivered it. Through labor, through fear, through relentless structure. Obedience was absolute. Humanity was molded, broken, and reshaped. And somewhere in the hearts of the prisoners small sparks endured, whispering that freedom once existed and might exist again. At 1200, prisoners emerged from the brief midday rations. Meals were cold, meager, and consumed in strict silence. Any word, any glance could draw a lash, or worse. Servitors and guards watched with relentless eyes. Obedience was demanded. Compliance was survival. Every motion was measured, every expression scrutinized. Afternoon labor intensified. Minds stretched deeper into the scarred surface of the planet. Furnaces roared with molten metal. Conveyor belts groaned under the weight of raw materials. Prisoners dug, hammered, carried, and bent beneath oppressive loads. Dust and ash clogged throats, sweat streamed down faces. Every motion was observed. Mistakes brought lashes, prods, or chainswords. Pain enforced obedience. Fear dictated every action. Indoctrination accompanied labor. Confessors glided silently along corridors and workshops. Questions were asked softly, but every word carried threat. Doubt in the Emperor, or a flicker of hesitation, was punished instantly. Creeds were repeated, hymns were intoned, lessons were drilled relentlessly. Faith became instinct, necessity, reflex. The hymn echoes filled factories, not to inspire but to control. Voices hollow, bodies moved in mechanical unison. One misstep, wrong intonation, delayed response. Punishment followed swiftly. Children in Schola Progenium were not spared. From morning until late afternoon they were drilled, corrected, and reshaped. Pain and repetition forged loyalty. Hesitation was crushed. Minds became weapons of devotion. Machines groaned, hissing with heat and steam. Dust coated lungs, skin and hair. Limbs ached. Prisoners were shadows of their former selves. The Imperium demanded perfection, delivered through fear and relentless labor. Small sparks of humanity persisted, whispers beneath machinery, hands touching briefly in solidarity, memories of home worlds or distant stars, dangerous, fleeting, yet alive. Guards and servitors monitored constantly. Commissars inspected, noted, corrected. Fear shaped faith. Pain honed attention. Obedience became instinct. The world itself pressed down, teaching the same lesson over and over. Prisoners were pressed, molded, reshaped. Afternoon hours dragged endlessly, sweat, ash, and blood-stained uniforms in hands. Voices hoarse from chanting the creed, backs burned from labor. Yet the routine pressed on. Survival demanded compliance. Faith demanded submission. Every day was a lesson. Every day was a test. Afternoon labor also exposed prisoners to hazards beyond supervision. Machinery malfunctioned without warning. Fires flared in furnaces, rockfalls from mines crushed limbs. Each accident reminded prisoners how fragile life was under the Imperium's rule. Yet the weak could not escape. Every risk reinforced obedience, survival through vigilance, compliance through fear. By 1600, fatigue thickened. Movement slowed, but punishment was swift. Guards did not tolerate lagging. Commissars roamed, chainswords glinting, eyes scanning. Servitors hovered, recording every motion, every expression. The planet itself seemed alive, pressing in from every side. Prisoners moved as if part of the machine. Humanity became optional. Sparks of defiance persisted, small, dangerous, and fleeting. Whispered words shared beneath machinery. Hands clasped briefly in secret. Memories of home, distant stars, and lost family flickered in the mind. They were faint lights in a world of unrelenting shadow. Reminders that freedom once existed, that it might exist again, if only in thought. By 1730, afternoon labor began to wane. Prisoners' bodies trembled, limbs ached, minds dulled. Yet indoctrination persisted, creeds repeated, hymns intoned. Faith was drilled into every fiber of being. Survival demanded submission. Obedience became instinct. Fear was omnipresent. Every element of the penal world functioned as a single unbroken instrument of control. By 1800, the afternoon ended. Guards moved prisoners into holding areas. Servitors recorded final data. Fatigue weighed heavily. Shadows lengthened across stone floors. The day's lessons were carved into body and mind. Night routines awaited, bringing punishment, fear, and further indoctrination. Humanity was optional. Obedience was mandatory. Sparks of memory flickered faintly, invisible to the Imperium, yet stubbornly alive in the darkness. As the sun sank behind jagged spires, shadows deepened. Darkness brought no relief. Nightfall was another layer of control. Prisoners huddled in cold corridors, eyes hollow, bodies trembling. Fear never rested. The Imperium's lesson was relentless. At 1800, the night's terror began. Guards patrolled with chainswords glinting. Servitors glided silently along walls, sensors scanning. Commissars walked lines, eyes sharp, hands ready. Hesitation, whispered words, fleeting glances, all could mean death. Punishment was immediate, pain was constant, submission was demanded, executions were public, ritualized. A prisoner judged heretic or dissident was dragged forward. Confessors intoned the creed. The condemned knelt in chains, eyes darting for mercy that would not come. Chainswords roared. Bolters fired warning shots into the ground. Screams echoed through courtyards and tunnels. Each execution was lesson and warning. Compliance meant life. Defiance meant death. Silence returned quickly, but the memory lingered, etched into every mind. One guardsman, accused of thought heresy, knelt in dust. Dreams of home worlds were ash. Memories of distant stars were erased by pain. Limbs severed, bodies hurled into pit fires, and the Imperium used death as a tool, a spectacle to enforce obedience. Punishment was precise, fear was education, pain was doctrine. Beyond execution, torture was an art. Hands were crushed, backs lashed, prisoners submerged in cold water, forced to chant the creed until voices cracked. Mind and body were tested relentlessly. Obedience became reflex. Survival demanded submission. Humanity was optional. Even in darkness, sparks persisted. Whispered words, a brief touch between prisoners. Memories of family or home, flickers of forbidden light in unending shadow, dangerous, fleeting, yet alive. Ghosts of humanity resisted the Imperium's relentless control. The night dragged on. Prisoners moved mechanically, chanting the creed, performing tasks under watchful eyes. Servitors recorded every motion. Guards enforced obedience without pause. Commissars corrected immediately. Every element of the penal world functioned as a single unbroken instrument of control. By 2100, exhaustion had deepened. Limbs trembled, minds dulled. Some collapsed, dragged to punishment chambers or medical bays. Others forced themselves onward, driven by fear and a faint spark of hope. The Imperium demanded the weak bend or break, no exceptions. Even the dead served the system. Bodies were burned, recycled, or fed to machinery. Nothing went to waste. Humanity was optional. Prisoners existed as raw material for labor, indoctrination, and death. Every night, the penal world reinforced this truth. Punishment extended beyond physical suffering. Psychological torment was constant. Prisoners were haunted by memories of comrades dragged away. Shadows seemed alive. Silence was filled with whispers of fear. Dreams were invaded by visions of chains and bolters. Fear, pain, indoctrination, inseparable. Obedience was survival. Resistance was annihilation. By 2300, prisoners were near breaking. Limbs stiff, muscles screaming, voices hoarse, minds fogged. Yet indoctrination persisted. Hymns were intoned mechanically, creeds repeated without thought. Faith was drilled into every fiber of being. Fear and devotion intertwined. Every hour of night reinforced submission. In hidden corners, sparks of defiance persisted. Secret gestures, whispered words, memories of stars, home worlds, and lost families. They were faint lights in darkness, fragile but persistent. Small acts of solidarity, fleeting but alive. Dangerous, yet stubborn, even in the Imperium's shadow, humanity's essence survived. By midnight, night routines concluded. Prisoners huddled in dim bunks, crouched on cold floors, chained to walls. Surveillance never ceased. Guards and servitors did not rest. Obedience remained mandatory. Dreams were minimal. Fear was omnipresent. Humanity reshaped, broken, controlled. Sparks of hope lingered. Freedom existed only in thought. Survival demanded submission. Faith demanded devotion. Life was obedience. Life was for the machine. The penal world was complete. Body, mind, and spirit had been drilled, broken, and rebuilt into instruments of the Imperium. Darkness reigned. Fear ruled. Humanity endured quietly, secretly, like an ember waiting for air. The night ended, but the lessons did not. Exhausted bodies rested only briefly. Eyes hollow, limbs stiff, minds sharpened by fear. The penal world never truly slept. Its purpose waited, unseen but constant. What the Imperium called salvation was another form of control. The official line was simple. The Imperium existed to protect humanity, to keep its people pure, to safeguard the Emperor's vision. Deviants, heretics, those who resisted, each was a threat, each needed correction. The creed justified every lash, every execution, every toil, every chant, every broken spirit. This was the story told to the galaxy. Yet the truth ran deeper. Prisoners were not redeemed. They were repurposed. The penal worlds were factories of obedience, of bodies and minds reshaped to serve the Imperium's war machine. Those who survived labor and indoctrination became part of the penal legion. Guardsmen drawn from heretics, rebels, and criminals were molded into instruments of death. Their loyalty was forged under pain, their courage born of fear. Life was cheap, submission was priceless. In the penal legion, a single day could decide survival. Missions were almost always fatal. Siege after siege, planet after planet, penal legionnaires were thrown into combat with little support. They were expendable. They were necessary. The Imperium needed bodies to hold lines, to test weapons, to bleed the enemy dry. A guardsman's past did not matter. His service was measured only in obedience, his value only in how long he survived. Children, too, were not spared. Orphans and abandoned youths were taken from shattered worlds. The Schola Progenium became their new reality. Within its walls, devotion was drilled into every fiber. Physical training was brutal. Lessons in faith, loyalty, and obedience relentless. The young were molded into soldiers and servants of the Emperor, their identities erased, their wills bent. Fear and indoctrination became instinct. Even the exceptional, the strong-willed, or the cleverest minds were not immune. Heretical thoughts were detected quickly. Dissidents punished. A single error, a fleeting doubt, or hesitation meant immediate correction. Pain and terror ensured conformity. Lessons were absolute. There was no mercy. Humanity itself was secondary. Only obedience mattered. Penal worlds in Schola Progenium produced tools for the Imperium, not citizens. Each person was an ingredient in a larger machine. Some were sent as penal legionnaires to fight and die. Some were trained as faithful servants, clerics, or officers. Others were broken entirely, their essence consumed to fuel the Astronomicon or maintain the Imperium's machinery. Life, faith, and even loyalty were commodities. Humanity was optional. Submission was required. The line between salvation and exploitation blurred. The Imperium claimed to be humanity's light, yet in the shadows of penal worlds, in the halls of Schola Progenium, and on the battlefields where penal legionnaires fought, it became clear. Survival was measured by obedience. Every strike, every chant, every lesson was part of the system. Every act of compliance was both punishment and reward. By the time night faded and the next morning approached, prisoners, those who remained, were already being readied for the next phase. Bodies aching, minds numb, hearts tempered by fear. Some would become soldiers, some clerics, some fuel for the Astronomicon. All were tools, none were free. The Imperium's promise of salvation had been rewritten into obedience, service, and sacrifice. And as the first horns of dawn sounded, echoing through stone corridors and scorched courtyards, one truth remained. Life under the Imperium was never for the individual. It was for the machine. Every soul was counted, every body measured, every mind bent to the Emperor's will. The penal world's lessons had done their work. Humanity endured, broken, controlled, repurposed, and the cycle would continue endlessly without pause. The morning light barely touched the high walls of the Schola Progenium. Silence was thick, discipline sharper than any blade. The young prisoners moved in measured steps, eyes fixed, minds drilled. Every gesture, every glance, every breath was observed. Obedience was not optional. It was survival. Children, often no older than 10 or 12, had already learned fear. Memories of lost homes, broken families, distant stars, all erased by the Imperium's methodical teaching. They were taught that the Emperor's will was absolute. Their thoughts were monitored, doubt punished, hesitation crushed. Loyalty was forged through pain and repetition, drilled until it became instinct. Physical training was relentless, limbs were pushed beyond human limits. Endurance and strength were prized above comfort or mercy. Hunger and exhaustion were constant companions. Yet punishment alone was not enough. Minds had to be shaped, creeds repeated endlessly, hymns intoned until voices cracked. Fear and faith became intertwined. Obedience was survival. Resistance was death. Beyond training, the Schola Progenium prepared its wards for service. Many would become officers, commissars, or trusted servants of the Emperor. Others were assigned to more dire tasks. Penal legionnaires drawn from adult prisoners were one example, but psychers formed another, more dangerous cohort. Gifted children, or those with latent abilities, were identified early. Their minds were monitored, tested, and broken if necessary. Psychers were not trained to serve. They were harvested. Their power fed the Astronomicon, the great beacon that guided fleets across the stars. Training often ended in horror. Mistakes or rebellion were fatal. Even compliance offered no comfort. The process was excruciating. Every thought, every spark of energy, every moment of independence was detected and crushed. Obedience was enforced through fear and pain, loyalty extracted at the cost of humanity. The Imperium's machinery was vast. Penal worlds, Schola Progenium, psychers, and penal legionnaires all were parts of the same system. Life, mind, and spirit were commodities. Bodies were resources, minds were fuel. Humanity was optional, only the machine mattered. The Emperor's will was executed with precision. Every lesson, every punishment, every day reinforced the truth. Survival required submission. Even the strongest minds, the most resilient children, felt the weight of the Imperium. A brief hesitation could mean reassignment, punishment, or death. Friends disappeared silently. Lessons were learned through observation as much as through direct instruction. Trust was impossible. Loyalty was manufactured. Fear was constant. Faith was engineered. Humanity became a whisper beneath the crushing weight of obedience. And yet, even in this darkness, sparks endured. A glance exchanged in secret, a whispered encouragement. Memories of home worlds or distant stars, small acts of defiance, fleeting and dangerous, but alive. They reminded the children that freedom had existed once. Perhaps it could exist again, even if only in thought. These were tiny, fragile embers, but they persisted despite the Imperium's relentless control. By midday, the Schola's lessons had run their course for the morning. Children were broken, molded, and prepared for service. Some would rise as leaders, others as soldiers, and some would fuel the Astronomicon. All were instruments of the Imperium. None were free. Humanity was optional. Life, faith, and thought existed only to serve the machine. As the day ended and shadows lengthened, the Schola Progenium remained silent, oppressive, unyielding. Its wards were ready for the next cycle. Training, indoctrination, punishment, and preparation. The system was perfect. The Imperium's will was absolute. Submission was life. Disobedience was death. And through it all, the galaxy continued, guided by the Astronomicon, powered by psychers, defended by penal legionnaires, and ordered by fear. The galaxy outside was bright with stars, yet on countless worlds darkness ruled. Not the absence of light, but the weight of fear. The Imperium's reach was absolute. its laws unforgiving, its punishment swift. Across hive cities, rural colonies, and barren settlements, people learned early that one misstep could cost everything. Even a whisper of dissent was dangerous. A complaint, a joke, a glance interpreted wrongly. Families vanished overnight. Doors left open, words spoken in anger, children asking forbidden questions. Each could trigger the long arm of the Imperium. Disappearances were permanent, names erased, memories rewritten. And still life went on. Survival demanded caution. Trust became dangerous, neighborhoods fractured, friends eyed each other with suspicion. Husbands doubted wives. Children betrayed siblings. Loyalty was no longer personal. It belonged only to the Emperor. Reporting infractions was instinct, not choice. Informers appeared everywhere. Shadows carried ears. Walls held eyes. Every citizen became both prey and observer. Survival required vigilance. Fear was education. Markets and streets moved in hushed rhythm. Merchants whispered over counters. Children ran silently, afraid of being overheard. Conversations were brief, eyes lowered. Even laughter felt forbidden. Communities were hollow shells. Rituals persisted, but their meaning was stripped. Faith existed, but only as obedience. Humanity survived in fragments. Rumors of penal worlds and scola progenium reached every corner. Stories of disappearances, public executions, and the relentless training of children spread like fire. Parents feared the day their offspring would be taken. Adults worried about debts, taxes, or minor misdeeds. Every act of defiance, intentional or not, could summon a commissar, an inquisitor, or an adepta sororitas. Punishment was absolute. Mercy was rare, and even mundane life became an act of survival. Eating, working, and speaking were all fraught with risk. Citizens learned the rhythm of caution. They memorized the schedule of patrols. They noted the shadows of guards. They whispered warnings to one another in the dark. Every day was a negotiation with fear. Every night a test of loyalty. Horrors of the penal worlds were distant yet immediate. Tales of penal legionnaires dying in siege battles. Children broken in scola progenium. And psychers drained for the astronomican haunted imaginations. The knowledge that loved ones could be taken without notice kept obedience constant. Fear was constant. Distrust became instinct. Humanity became secondary. Through it all, some resisted silently. A hidden word of comfort. A brief gesture of solidarity. A story passed in secret. Small rebellions, almost invisible, flickered like candle flames in the darkness. Dangerous, yes, but necessary. These were reminders that even under the Imperium's crushing control, fragments of humanity survived. By dusk, the hive cities were quiet but tense. Streets empty, shadows long, citizens moved carefully. Even a momentary lapse could be fatal. Fear shaped every decision. Distrust dictated every interaction. Families no longer shared secrets, only survival strategies. Life existed only as obedience, as shadow, as reflection of the Emperor's will. And as night approached, the weight of the Imperium's control pressed down. Survival meant compliance. Compliance demanded vigilance. Trust was a weapon, turned inward and outward. The galaxy's brightest stars shone indifferently above, but below, the people lived in darkness, silent, suspicious, broken yet enduring. Humanity was optional. Fear was essential. The night deepened, and with it the weight of absence. Across countless worlds, people vanished. One day present, the next gone. No warning, no explanation. The Imperium claimed these souls were for the greater good, In truth, they fed the machine. Names erased, histories rewritten, lives consumed to sustain order, obedience, and war. Families waited in vain. Mothers called for children who would never return. Fathers searched streets for sons lost to the penal worlds. Siblings whispered names of brothers and sisters dragged away by inquisition. The void left by disappearances was filled with fear, silence, and suspicion. Humanity itself seemed to retreat under the Imperium's shadow. Communities became shells. People learned to speak cautiously, to move carefully, to hide emotion. Every glance could betray a thought. Every conversation carried risk. Trust vanished. Neighbors became observers. Friends became informers. Even children watched one another with suspicion. Survival depended on reporting infractions before suffering them. Fear was the law. Obedience, the only security. Horrors of the penal worlds were never distant stories, they were warnings. Public executions, mutilations, and the relentless processing of psychers and orphans spread terror. Tales of penal legionnaires thrown into impossible battles reminded all that life was cheap. Resistance was unthinkable. Compliance became instinct. Fear was constant. Through this orchestrated terror, the Imperium thrived. Billions of lives, nameless and consumed, sustained its endless war. Children molded in Schola Progenium became tools. Adults crushed in labor camps became soldiers or fuel for the Astronomicon. Each disappearance reinforced the system. Humanity was optional, obedience mandatory. Life became a resource, extracted, measured, and repurposed for the Emperor's will. Yet even in the shadows, fragments remained as secret acts of kindness, a whispered word, a small gesture. These were sparks, almost invisible but stubborn. They reminded the oppressed that life, memory, and humanity could persist even under the Imperium's relentless control. Dangerous sparks, yes, but necessary. Names lost to the machine faded from records. History itself was sanitized. The Imperium documented victories, not deaths. Millions of lives vanished without trace, their absence unnoticed, their sacrifice unacknowledged. The galaxy's chroniclers recorded order, progress, faith, but never the cost. The truth was buried in silence, in fear, in nameless graves, and still, the people endured. They walked carefully through shadowed streets. They avoided attention. They whispered only in darkness. Life continued, but not freely. Every day was a negotiation with fear. Every night a reminder of the penal worlds, Schola Progenium, and the Imperium's endless reach. Humanity was broken, controlled, measured, repurposed. Yet it survived, quietly, invisibly, like embers hidden beneath ash. By dawn, the cycle continued. Another day, another round of obedience. Families held each other a little tighter, spoke a little quieter, feared a little more. The Imperium grew stronger, fed by fear, blood, and silence. Every nameless death, every vanished soul, every broken mind was a building block in the Empire's foundation. The machine required sacrifice, and sacrifice it received, unending, unacknowledged, absolute. The Imperium's strength was forged in shadows, its stability owed to fear, its power maintained by billions of nameless deaths. And yet, amidst the control, the indoctrination, and the terror, life persisted, fragile, broken, and silent, but alive. Humanity endured even when it seemed forgotten, and the galaxy spun on, guided by the Astronomicon, fed by psychers, defended by penal legionnaires, and ordered by fear. The galaxy glittered above, a tapestry of stars. From orbit, worlds seemed serene, yet beneath that calm, shadows moved. Fear, obedience, and control ruled. The Imperium claimed to be humanity's savior, a beacon of light, a force of protection. Yet in the depths of penal worlds, in the halls of Schola Progenium, and across battlefields soaked with penal legion blood, the truth was starkly different. Walls of adamantium, barbed wire, and servitor-studded towers hid the Imperium's reality. Life was not for the individual, it was for the machine. Every act of compliance, every sacrifice, every broken mind and body fed the Empire's relentless engine. The light of salvation was a shadow of chains. The glow of faith masked terror. Hope existed only in whispers, in fleeting glances, in forbidden memories. By Orforonquak, prayers echoed through corridors. By midday, labor consumed all. By nightfall, executions reminded the living of their place. Life was measured in obedience, devotion, and survival. Humanity was optional. Fear was constant. And still the Imperium endured. Billions lived under its watchful gaze. Billions died to sustain it. Each soul was a cog in the endless machine. Even the brightest of the Emperor's promises, the Astronomicon, the shining beacon guiding fleets across the stars, masked shadows. Psychers burned, feeding its light. Penal legionnaires bled for its protection. Children trained in Schola Progenium gave their lives for its functioning. Every act of sacrifice, every loss, every nameless death was hidden beneath the radiance. The light was sustained, but humanity was not. Society itself had changed. Trust vanished. Fear became instinct. Communities were fractured. Families lived cautiously. Neighbors watched neighbors. Children grew wary of friends. Culture, memory, and history bent to survival, and to live under the Imperium was to understand that obedience was life, resistance death, and humanity a faint whisper against overwhelming control. Yet in the darkness, sparks persisted, silent defiance. Secret gestures, stories told in whispers, these were fragile, fleeting, but alive. They reminded the oppressed that freedom had existed and perhaps could exist again. Even under the Imperium's crushing weight, humanity's essence endured. Obedience could shape bodies, crush spirits, and reorder societies. But it could not fully extinguish the human spark. And so the question remained, echoing across the stars. What is salvation if it comes at the cost of freedom? What is light if it casts shadows so deep they hide entire generations? The Imperium called itself a protector, a savior of mankind, yet its protection demanded billions of sacrifices. Its salvation required obedience over will, fear over hope, compliance over choice. Was this truly the light of humanity, or a darkness draped in gold and faith? In the great void, the stars continued their silent vigil. Planets spun in endless orbits, indifferent to the suffering below. Astronomicon's beacon shone bright, cutting through the darkness. But in the shadows of penal worlds, in the silence of broken minds, in the grief of nameless families, that light never reached. The cries of the oppressed, the whispers of rebellion, and the flickers of forbidden hope were lost to the vastness of the Imperium. Still the galaxy moved forward. Humanity endured, though scarred, controlled, and repurposed. Life persisted amidst fear. Obedience ruled. Faith guided. And death, nameless and constant, reinforced the system. The Imperium's claim of salvation remained unchallenged, for most unquestionable. But beneath the surface, beneath the veneer of glory and devotion, the truth festered. Salvation had a cost measured in blood, fear, and chains. And as the cycle continued, one question remained, unanswered, persistent, haunting. Can a civilization truly call itself a beacon of light when it relies on fear, subjugation, and endless sacrifice to survive? Can a ruler claim to save humanity when it consumes humanity itself? The Imperium declared itself the light of mankind. Yet behind its walls, its towers, its penal worlds, only darkness endured. The shadow of salvation stretched farther than the stars could reach. The galaxy spun on, indifferent. The Astronomicon shone. Penal legionnaires fought. Children in Schola Progenium learned obedience. Psychers powered the light. Life continued, bound to the will of the Emperor. Obedience was survival. Fear was law. Humanity flickered, fragile yet enduring. And somewhere in the quiet corners of the Imperium, that spark of defiance whispered. A reminder that even in the brightest light, shadows exist, and perhaps one day they might return.